Hello everybody. I wanted to walk through the steps for effective market predictions. Whenever something has happened, you ask yourself, does this event affect my market? Does this event cause a change in the willingness of suppliers to supply to my market? Does it change the desire of demanders to buy this product? Or possibly does it change both supply and demand? Figure that out first. Try to determine whether it's a shifter in supply or a shifter in demand. We'll revisit that in a second. The second question is this change in supply or demand, is it an increase or a decrease? If it is an increase, then it shifts to the right, and if it's a decrease, it's a shift to the left. As soon as you've gotten into a situation where you know you have a supply or demand shift to the left or right, then you can compare the new equilibrium point to the old equilibrium point. You've got a graph, you have all these familiar graphs where either there's the demand is shifting to the left or right and you're in familiar territory. So you go from the very sublime or unusual and become more and more certain and use a model that's very familiar for figuring out whether the equilibrium price is higher or lower, whether the new equilibrium point means a higher or lower quantity sold. That is how you'd go about it. Now, when you are thinking about the shifts in demand and supply, you want to consider that there are non-price determinants of supply and there are also non-price determinants of demand, things that are other than price that cause shifts in supply and demand. And those types of things that make those changes are highlighted here on this list. We take a look and we see that the non-price determinants of supply are technology, the factors of production such as labor and costs of raw materials, and also the third non-price determinant of supply are any regulations, taxes, or subsidies that may come in place, changes in expectation of future prices on the part of suppliers, and the number of firms in the market. All of these things will alter the supply to the market. Remember that supply is willingness of the sellers. Now the non-price determinants of demand are the income of the buyers, the tastes and preferences of the buyers, the price of any complements or substitutes that might be out there in the market, changes in expectations of whatever future relative prices that might come into play, and market size or population changes. Those five things are the key non-price determinants of demand. Remember that demand is the desire of buyers to buy the product in question, and any one of these five things can change demand and shift it to the left or right. Any of these five items can shift supply to either the left or right depending on what direction it goes. Just pause for a second and think about whether it's going to cause an increase or decrease in supply. Technology, when it's adopted, always shifts supply to the right because it's an increase in supply. Input costs are going to have a different matter though. A higher cost of input is going to decrease supply, and less expensive inputs will cause an increase in supply. Taxes cause an increase in taxes will cause a shift in supply depending on how that tax is set up. Subsidies that the government gives to manufacturers or producers for providing certain goods and services to a market can cause a shift to the right. Taxes generally cause a shift to the left. Regulations, when they are imposed, cause shifts to the left in supply. Regulations, when they're removed, will cause a shift in right in supply. Changes in expectations, well, if expectations are good for the future, then suppliers will increase supply. And if suppliers are expecting a downturn in the economy or the market, then they will reduce supply now. They won't wait. They will do so now. Expectations are one of those elements that are self-fulfilling. And then the number of firms in the market, of course, if a company closes or another company opens, a new competitor, then that either will cause more suppliers means shift to the right in supply, an increase in supply, fewer sellers, a decrease in supply, a shift to the left. Over here, non-price determinants of demand, increase in income, increase in demand. Decrease in income, decrease in demand, or shift to the left. The only exception to that is when we're talking about inferior goods, and then the opposite is true. Well, if taste and preferences should make perfect sense to you, that an increase in the taste or preferences of our item will cause a shift to the right, an increase in demand, and vice versa. Now, complements and substitutes are really kind of having to do with the price of related goods. Interestingly enough, that if a complementary good, let's say if mustard becomes less expensive than something that goes on mustard, like hot dogs, has an increase in demand. Hot dog buns and hot dogs, things like that. Substitute goods, on the other hand, would be have the reverse effect. So an increase in the cost of a substitute will cause a decrease in the demand for that substitute, and an increase in the demand for our product. So substitutes and complements are tricky, and you want to make sure you pay careful attention to what the effect on the demand for our product is when we're talking about another product or related good. Changes in expectations of future relative prices are similar, except that if the demand or buyers in the market expect that prices are going to go down in the future, then they will buy less this week or at this time. So the market, as it's characterized in this time period, will actually have a decrease in demand if there is an expectation that future prices for our product will be going down. People will wait to buy their goods to see if they're right. And the population changes, more people, more demand. Thank you very much.